Hey, your mind is Stuart with Wine on the Dime, and today I have a very special episode for you. I'm going to be interviewing Benjamin Calais. He's the owner of the French Connection and Calais Winery in the Texas Hill Country, and we're going to be talking about a few of his new wines that he just released for the French Connection. So make sure you stay tuned. One of the things that I've always been interested in, and I think other people might be interested in too, is what motivated you to come to Texas to make French wines with Texas grapes?
I came here for an IT job. I'm a computer engineer by trade, so I came here to work on an IT project. I work for a computer security company. We did voice over IP security software, and so I came here for that. That was in Dallas, or just north of Dallas, and I opened the winery more as a weekend project, a little side project. We had our first place downtown Dallas, or just east of downtown in Deep Ellum. And it's this little warehouse neighborhood, or it was a warehouse neighborhood at the time. It's changed a lot, but it was just a small all-in-one, make like 200 cases on the first year, just really, really tiny little side business. And it just kind of grew from there. Now we're my 13th season here in Texas that we're about to start. So just kind of organically grew. Calais is about making 2,500 cases now. Quite a bit more. It's still very small, but it's just organically grew over a long period of time to what it is now.
So you didn't have a background in winemaking, and then you came over here for an interview. This was just totally. Was it something that you kind of stumbled into as a hobby, or did you actually have previous experience as a winemaker, but you just ended up going into the IT realm before you came?
Well, I have a lot of my friends that do this for a living. I have a pretty diverse science background. So there's one side of winemaking that's chemistry. That's probably like the easier side for me to acquire, just because I have the right background for all this, both from the engineering side, but just from like more of a generic science. Like in France, you're forced into taking all the generic chemistry and math and all that good stuff in order to get to your engineering degree. And then I have a lot of my friends that do this for a living. So from a more practical standpoint, just there's nothing that replaces spending time in vineyards and crush seasons. You got to work your way through the crush seasons, and it's good to learn on a small scale so you can make small mistakes that are not too costly. It avoids you making like 5 years down the road, you get so much better at it. You're just repetition really helps in terms of winemaking. So, and also having somebody to call when you have a weird season like 2011 where it's 100 degree every week.
For like 100 straight days, 100.
Yeah, setting record. I can't remember how many days it was, but it was a long time.
Yeah, I know. All I remember is I stopped counting whenever they put it on the calendar. This is the 100th straight day of over 100 degrees. At that point, I was like, no. And the funny thing is, I had a friend who was moving from Ohio, and this was his first summer in Texas, was experiencing that. And he was just like, I don't understand why I moved here. I don't understand why you people live here. This is a horrible place. And since then, he's realized it's not as crazy as that every year. But yeah, I was like, I told him, I was like, dude, this is the worst summer to move into, like, that I can remember in a long time.
It was rough on our vineyards for sure. It made a good wine. They were just not long-lived wines. So they're very interesting seasons. And now we know how to react in those scenarios. And we pushed some buttons not knowing what was going to work, and some stuff worked, some stuff did not, and both on the winemaking and on the vineyard side. And it's definitely like case scenario party encounter again, and we'll be so much better prepared now when it happens again than we were at that time.
So did some of the things that get adjusted were things like when harvest time was it like the sort of the storage and transportation, like the logistics aspect of it?
Yeah, we didn't make the bad picking decision. I had the luxury. So 2003 in Bordeaux was the year of not just in Bordeaux, all of France, but I have some good friends in Bordeaux. And so since France had run through this in pretty recent past, we had seen the different wines being made. Some with good luck, some with a little bit less. And we made a couple calls to some friends and asked what were the picking decisions that they ended up being on the right side. And the ones that were on the wrong side. And that just kind of changed our picking strategy. We're usually known for being the last ones to pick for Calais. We've been known to be out there picking grapes a month after everybody else is done.
I'm gonna ask you about that later.
But in the middle of like a huge drought, when every day is 100 degrees, at some point all you're doing is bleeding acid, and we start picking, and it was the earliest start to a season we've ever seen, and it was the earliest finish to a season we've ever seen, and it almost everything panned out. Like mid great wines are not holding enough acid to really age for a long time. So I think like they're at their peak right now, and you probably don't want to go that much further with those guys. But they made a really good wine, so we're pretty happy with how it turned out. But that really helped us to know that on a year like that, you know, in 72 hours, you're going to go from like underripe to overripe, and you just have to be sitting on it. And lucky for us, a small season, we're able to do that. You just camp out there and wait and just taste fruit every day until you find the blocks that need to come off, and just stay out there for as long as you can. Just bring it back, go right back, because something else got to come off.
So you kind of mentioned Bordeaux a little while ago. Your Calais wines are basically Bordeaux style wines. Your French Connection wines are Rhone style. So one of the questions that I have is, what is it about wanting to make essentially very traditional French style wines with Texas grapes versus doing what a lot of producers do, which is they try to kind of up with like a pure Texas representation of their own wines or their own styles? So what is it that made you kind of want to go back and to say, I want to make these grapes show off kind of their old world roots versus like this kind of new wave Texas winemaking route that a lot of people are doing?
Well, those are two very different challenges. Calais is a little bit more established, been at it for a little longer. A lot of people still to this day don't believe that we can make great Bordeaux varietals in Texas. We sell out of our stuff every year, so that's I think that's a good metric of success for us. People like it, people buy it, and then they come back and they want more. So to me, it's a good metric of us being successful. It's just that we're making people happy. And it's not easy making Bordeaux varietals, that's for sure. There's seasons that just don't go your way. Last year was a weird season where some varietals were great and some others were not. On the Rhone side, like the French Connection stuff, it's way more consistent. There's a lot more consistency to it. There's multiple reasons for that, but just the varietals in general, they come from such a hot climate. Like it's hot in the Loire Valley in the summer. Specifically, the more south you go, the hotter it's going to get. And because usually you get away from the big body of water that the Loire Valley is, and the Rhone River. And so you end up maybe not in similar climate, but way closer of a climate to where those varietals originated from. So they're a little bit more predictable. Also, there's a lot of blending that happens. So Rhone reds tend to be blended, so it gives you a lot more play room. You can blend a little bit of Cap Franc in the Cap Sauv, but it may or may not make that Cap Sauv better, and people have an expectation of what Cap Sauv is going to be like. With the Rhone varietals, it's not just Cap Franc. Like it's not just a single varietal that's going to potentially blend well in there. There's 13, at least, depending on what you include and what you exclude. Is like you can include or exclude Petit Syrah from the list. You can include or exclude Carignan from that list. Like there's so many different varietals, and a lot of them really want to blend well together. So you create a little bit more consistency by playing a little bit more the blending game. So it's a little bit more sustainable of a plan. Like Calais is just bound to stay really, really tiny, and we like it like that. We could have the big winery by now, but it's not the goal. Where French Connection, we can create a little bit more of a consistency. So it's two totally different plans.
I mean, even from a square footage standpoint, when you're talking about the size of the winery, the French Connection's way bigger than Calais.
It's also a way bigger property, so we have a little bit more space out there, and it's two different plans, but we just have one winemaking team behind both of the plans. So so everybody everybody does everything together. So
That's awesome. So kind of going in, you were talking about kind of a one winemaking team, um, and then sort of before I got recording going, we were kind of talking about some of the things that you're doing to keep busy. So for people who aren't in Texas, a lot of the tasting rooms are shut down essentially. Like there are some people who can kind of do outside service where you can sell a bottle and then you can kind of take it somewhere on the property and enjoy it, social distancing, but the actual tasting room experience is pretty much shut down as of this moment. So since you aren't spending as much time serving as you were before, what are some of the things you're doing to kind of fill all that time that you had? And I say all that time knowing that you're a guy who's like literally all over the state at all times. But when you're actually at the winery, what are you doing?
well, pretty much always 7 days a week is just at the moment we're pouring a lot more concrete. So we've poured quite a bit of concrete in the past couple of weeks, that's for sure. We have renovation, crush pad at French Connection. We're switching presses. We got a beautiful press from Germany this year, and it needs an air compressor. So we ran electrical for the air compressor. We poured a concrete pad for it. We're going to anchor it into there. We have a new chiller going in. Like we literally do all our construction and maintenance ourselves. So like under normal circumstances, we're already in the weeds with all that stuff. And then this year we had a little issue with some of our winery floors, and so we had to redo that, which meant emptying the whole winery building. And so we got the floors redone. Which the floors, it's a very boring subject, but makes a world of difference. For wineries clean, it usually makes better wine, and so all the things that help you make good wine, it's a lot of like greedy details that are not sexy, but that need to happen. So we're working on all the non-sexy stuff that needs to happen before crush time is coming, which it's coming. It's coming faster than normal.
So for your press, the one that's coming from Germany, is it a balloon press? You mentioned air compressor, so that kind of made me feel like it is.
So it's a Wilmès press. It's the gold standard of presses, to be honest. We pressed with some beautiful French technology up to last year, but we kind of outgrew it, and we didn't like the design of the bigger version from the French manufacturer as much as we like the smaller one. And we had the biggest one they made in the classic size, and we needed something a little bit bigger, and well, a little bit bigger, 3 times as big, because last year every single press day ended up being 14, 16, 18 hours. And so it was a little rough on our staff, and we don't have a lot of people. You can throw people at it, or you can get the equipment you're going to need. And so we decided this year to go for the press. It's a really interesting press design. It's not a normal like single bag press. It's vertical channels instead of horizontal. It's probably really boring details, but it basically makes your cleaning life much easier. And like I said, winemaking is mostly about cleaning stuff and keeping stuff sanitary. And so, the whole top of the press removed, so you're standing on the ground instead of being crawled into a closed container in 100-degree weather that's being baked by the sun, and you might pass out in there. If you try to clean it, you're actually like standing on the ground while using your spray gun to like clean it up. So, but at that press size, you need to run off of an air compressor. We do not have a real 3-phase connection at a French Connection. We do have it at Calais, but we have to choose where the press is going to be, and French Connection has more space. And so out there, we don't have direct 3-phase from the power company, so we can't run an onboard compressor. Like presses come in 3-phase, and so we decided to get a big single-phase air compressor, so we wouldn't strain the fake 3-phase that we created with a phase converter. And so because of that, we have like a whole bunch more stuff to do. We could have put our old press at the compressor on board, it worked just fine. But when the press gets a little bit bigger, the power demand gets a little bit hungrier. And I think our electrical company is going to end up running 3-phase down our road, like in the next year or so. They started staking a bunch of poles, but at the moment, this is all the stuff that we have to do so we can actually make it all work. Where we are in the building that we have, we're not quite ready to run brand new power to that building and all that.
You mean You don't want to blow a transformer and start a fire by just pressing out the wine.
No, yeah, well, it was nice at Calais to have three-phase, and we're looking forward to having like native three-phase again. But in the meantime, we're finding a way to. It's the name of the game. Finding a way to make it work. Just you don't have to run to the end of crush season. If you crawl, that's just fine. Just get it done.
That's awesome. So I know one of the other things you did recently was, if I recall, you just planted a vineyard in the Davis Mountains, on the Davis Mountains AVA.
Yes. So, friends of mine acquired a property that historically has had there's an historical winery that existed on that property a long time ago. It was called Blue Mountain Vineyards. I think it went out of business in late 1990s or early 2000s. It's at that time was the highest elevation vineyard in Texas, and I believe it died from Pierce's disease. I can't be the one to say why or how it happened because I wasn't really there. I didn't live in the U.S. at the time. It's like 10 years before I got there. But when I got to the U.S., I got to taste quite a few bottles that came off of that property, and I always thought that was a prime spot for Bordeaux varietals in Texas. We source from that whole area. We have stuff in Alpine. We have a couple things in Fort Davis. This will be an estate project with my partners at Sharp. So the other ones running the vineyard out there. For the most part, we're going to plant Cab Sauv, and then we're going to see once we have Cab established what else we want to do. But we're basically going to put in a brand new estate winery out there. So it's a long-term project. That's we're probably 5-6 years away from having anything to show for it, but it's a pretty exciting project. It's the highest elevation. What we planted this year is the highest elevation ever planted in Texas.
Yeah, I
really
remember
on the side of a mountain.
Yeah, so a while back, I went through and did a certification for Texas Wine Specialist, and they actually specifically mentioned that winery as the highest elevation plantings. And so the fact that you said that, I was like, wow, okay, that's actually really great space if you're looking at trying to get some great Bordeaux varietals.
Yeah, we're planting 500 feet higher than that planting was. So whatever is that number they gave you, it's 500 feet higher. It's quite the high getting up there. It's all volcanic. It's like literally on volcanic soil. It's you're in a different planet than the rest of Texas, and that's why we're all of it is going to be estate. So the vineyard, if you want to follow it, it's called Sharp Family Vineyards. Dan and Maura are the ones that own the property and are running all the vineyard side. And then we're going to be building an estate winery and going to make a small amount, like just. It's never going to be a big vineyard, but we're gonna plant a little bit more than what was planted this year, and just kind of find the spots that are the sweet spots for Bordeaux varietals. So it's all going to be Bordeaux out there, and we got to make wine. We've already made wine under Calais label from Fort Davis, from Blue Mountain Vineyard, which is kind of next door to the Sharp family project, and we're very, very happy. It's just Mother Nature is pretty angry out there. So so far we're having great season out there, but you never know. We've lost fruit like the night before crush time. We've had some heartbreaks out there. So hopefully we'll learn a lot from our tough lessons, and our plan is accounting for all the issues that we've had in the past. From frost, from like spring frost to hailstorms, which seem to be our two main ones.
I was going to ask, was it
hail? We have totally different problems on the high plains, but yeah, it seems to be there's concentration of hailstorms in Fort Davis seems to be a little high, and then the elevation just brings you spring frost. It's just the way it is. That's just part of the game, and there's ways to deal with it. Like site selection is really like the best way to go, and that's why we plant so high on this one, is because I think it is the best spot that we can plant, because cold air drains naturally down the hill, so we plant higher than any previous plantings I've been done property, so we could let the cold air just move away from us. We'll see.
Yeah,
you just always look smart on paper.
So what are some of the qualities that you're hoping to get out of those grapes that you don't get out of things that are coming out of the high plains or the hill country AVA?
This is just the volcanic nature of like it's volcanic soils. You're basically on the side of a former volcano, and so you have like fractured volcanic rocks. The high plains is sandy loam just about everywhere. The question is how much sandy loam do you have on top? Like we have like pure sandboxes, and that makes one style of wine. We have areas with a little bit more clay that makes a different style of wine. We have a lot of very different qualities. So we source down to Seminole and all the way up to Dalhart. So that's like 5 or 6 hours driving. I would have to check exactly how long it is, but it's a long way. We have stuff in Nevada to the east. We have stuff in Plains to the west. All the sites are very, very different. But like Fort Davis, definitely the anomaly. From a winemaking standpoint, it needs to be treated totally differently than just about anything else that we do. It has the quality of like mountain fruit, the actual quality of mountain fruit that you get from like Napa wines. From the higher elevation stuff in Napa, like I always tell people, like Mount Vineyard is something that we feel like we're going to be relatable to, because of the elevation, because of like nature of the soil. It's just there's a lot of things that make us believe we're going to go that route, and it's definitely like something that's total anomaly, like both on chemistry side. Like you're picking like 3 weeks into October, like. Some of my friends are done with their crush season next week. It's just totally out there. It's out there in elevation. It's out there in terms of distance from here, from civilization altogether. So the challenges that we have out there are totally different, and the wine is also totally different. And then you never get exactly the wine that you thought you were going to get, and that's part of the fun of this. So I'll refrain from saying what exactly going to end up comparing ourselves to this AVA or that AVA, because like people expect the outcome to be what was coming out of that property before, but we chose a totally different planning site than what it was done historically. Like the old vineyard site is still there, it's still high fence, it's in the middle of the property. It's a great vineyard site. It's just based on what we want to be doing out there, we decided that it was a different site that would be more suited to what we want to do. So it's going to be a very, very small production out there, like maybe like 500 cases to 1,000 cases max, like depending on the years. Mother Nature is going to fight us every bit of the way out there.
Oh yeah. So, it's funny because I remember talking to somebody, and they always ask what was the biggest issue with growing grapes in Texas, and I would always say it's depending on where you're at. If you're in the hill country, you're probably looking at hail, but all over the state, you're looking at late spring frost that end up happening. And I was like, and especially if you're going into the mountains, it's just you're getting just ravaged all the time. I mean, you can even have wind damage. I've seen people who have areas out there where the vines are literally being ripped out of the ground from windstorms, and so it's all sorts of crazy stuff. When you can get wine out of there, wine typically tends to be great, but you have to really understand how to kind of grow in those conditions and work all that. So that's what I wanted to ask specifically about that, because when I saw that you were growing grapes out there, I was kind of excited about it, and I wanted to kind of understand why you chose that area, but I didn't even know you went even above where it was before. That's
we're about as high as you can still turn a tractor around is really what it can do. We can technically go a little bit higher, but it's going to be impossible for us to safely run equipment. So if we go a little bit higher, then everything's got to be done by hand, and you have to remember we're in the middle of nowhere, and so it's kind of hard for us to find people to go and help us, and there's not that many people are going to volunteer to go and work in the middle of desert land out there. Not everybody's spending their weekends volunteering in Fort Davis. It's a little easier to get volunteers in the hill country than it is in Fort Davis.
Yeah. So. Well, I mean, you also then have to worry about the fact that they can only carry 1 bucket of grapes to the bin before they pass out from the lack of oxygen. That's the other thing too. You have to worry about that.
I spend a lot of time at elevation. I'm a big ski guy, and honestly, I don't get altitude sickness. And I'm used to the elevation, but I remember when we dug the test holes for up there, I literally drove from the hill country we got on site, we scouted a whole bunch of stuff on the property, and like we should dig here, send it to the lab. And we're digging by hand, which was really dumb of us. We should have waited till the next day, got a little mini excavator and done it that way. And so we spent like 3 or 4 hours, and I'm not actually made it yet. And I remember like, how high are we? And I just grabbed my phone. I'm like, there's an app that will tell you based on the GPS point where it is. And I looked at a number, and I'm like, oh, that's why it's a little harder than. Now we're a lot outside, you know, we're pouring concrete, we're digging holes, we're putting posts and fences and all kinds of like manual labor. We used to it, but like that was definitely the day I was like, oh yeah, this is actually really high. It doesn't feel like it, because you're kind of on the edge of the mountain range, and you see the desert in front of you. Like if you like turn your back to the mountain, you're basically the first mountain on the southern part of the Davis Mountain range. And so you don't feel like you're as high just based on the landscape around you. But if you face the mountain, you can see you have a big mountain in front of you, but to the back is basically the Chihuahua Desert, just like that edge. And so it makes you feel like you're lower than you actually are. I mean, it's higher than Denver.
Yeah, that's true. You are. Man, that's crazy. That's crazy. Okay, so shifting away from kind of that kind of stuff. So one of the things that I think is very interesting about you, and this is only stuff that people will know if they stalk you on Facebook like I do, is is that you really like to cook a lot, and you like to cook some crazy stuff. So what are some of the favorite things that you've cooked recently, and what did you pair with them?
I don't know what we're calling crazy stuff here. I guess not crazy stuff to me, but what are we calling crazy stuff?
Oh man, you made like this crazy roasted chicken with vegetables, and I mean, like I was looking at this thing, like this thing feeds like 12 people, but I didn't know if it was just like you in Victoria at the time, or if this was like you're feeding like a dozen people. I mean, the amount of food that you cooked on that dish was incredible.
Yeah. Well, I always tell people I don't enjoy I cook every day, but I don't enjoy everyday cooking. I enjoy way more making like feast meals. So I have a tendency to take daily meal and make a feast meal out of it. So if we can make it fancier and nicer, we will. So we still live in Johnson City. We're not in downtown Austin. Like our ingredient sourcing requires us to put a little advanced thought into it. Like we have all the source for like all the good like locally grass-fed meat and just all that. It's easy, but as far as like getting quality fish and things like that, it's a little bit harder. So yeah, I mean, I cook pretty traditional French fare, but I've been here for 13 years, so there's I'm proud of my brisket, just like any other Texan. Like I own 2 smokers, and I'm probably gonna make it 3 pretty soon.
Oh, which ones do you own? We have to establish your Texan cred right here. Which ones do you own?
I have an electrical smoker that's really old, and the door is the first one I ever got, and I almost exclusively use it for making cold smoked salmon in the winter.
Oh yes,
like log style. So like
yes.
at Christmas time, I'll make a huge batch. Like I'll go to the seafood wholesaler, and that's the only reason I have an account out there is to just buy it. Like the whatever is the best quality salmon they're gonna have at the time where it's freezing in Texas. That's when I can use that smoker for its purpose. So I basically have a big dryer vent, and I burn on one side. The cold air and the dryer vent cools off the smoke, so that it actually doesn't cook. It's really like true like lox style, like Norwegian lox style. So some years cottage salmon, some years going to be wild coho. If I have time, we'll try to do like just through the whole season, whatever wild ones. And then we'll end up with probably like some kind of Atlantic salmon at the end. And it freezes beautifully. So we make pretty big batches. And it really depends on how much time I have on my hands toward like December, January. And yeah, really like that's the main question, is whether I'm going to have time and whether it's going to be freezing outside. If it's not freezing, we honestly can't. Like, there's ways to cheat. Like, I freeze big blocks of ice. I put them at the bottom of the smoker to further cool the smoke. And it becomes pretty tedious. After that, one of my customer actually gave me like it's the simplest smoker. I think it's not worth a whole lot of money, and it works great. Like I think it's a $50 smoker, and it's just basically like a big round thing, like a little piece of galvanized metal. And the next one that I want, I do not have an offset. I've been debating between an offset and an insulated smoker, but I'm gonna get the insulated one, and that's because I don't have time. I have too many things going at the same time, and with the insulated one, I can start the brisket. I can walk away for 12 hours, not come back, and have perfectly cooked brisket.
Yeah, and on top of that, you don't have to use a ton of fuel. You can use like 1/4 of the amount of fuel, and you still get the same effect out of it. Yeah.
Yeah, it's super efficient. I mean, it's not like we don't have a whole lot of fuel. You know, we've had a little battle with oak wilt. We have a lot of fuel. Yeah, I know it's just more of a question of time. There's always different ways to approach it. And if I had all the time in the world, I'd love to just spend my day putting one more stick into the offset. That's it's very, very peaceful. But I'm very bad just sitting around and doing that.
Well, for as long as I've known you, you've never been someone who just sits around and does nothing. You have to be doing something. So.
Yeah, no, it's just not my thing. That's why I think that's the next one.
Yeah, no, I would say that's a good purchase. That's a good purchase. All right, so let's go ahead and transition. I want to talk about your Picpoul Blanc. I want to talk about this wine because I've been drinking it this whole time, and I think it is great. This is not my first bottle of it. I mean, today it was, but not like in general. But yeah, so the one of the things that I really like about this is the first thing I got out of it when I nosed it was I got this really nice kind of lemon effect that I was expecting out of that. But then there was this really nice florality that comes out of it. It has a good little bit of salt to it. It reminds me, it actually very much reminds me of a very traditional French Picpoul. And so that kind of, that brings me to the question. It's like, where did these grapes come from that ended up resulting in this wine?
There's not a whole lot of Picpoul in Texas. So it's still a newer varietal for Texas. I think the first ones to push for Picpoul in Texas was probably Bending Branch. At least that's the first ones that I personally remember. The John Rivenberg and Bob Youngs of this world. So I know they put some on the estate. They started talking to a lot of High Plains grape grower about the fact it was probably going to be a suited varietal and some people should put it in the ground. And it's definitely a weird one where there was quite a bit of pushback because if there's only one winery that's interested in it and somebody drops the contract, who's going to pick it up? Is there going to be any kind of market demand for that one? It's people are a little bit more cautious planting new whites than they are planting new reds. There's a lot more demand for red than white. And so we actually tasted all the Picpouls that we could get our hands on, both from Texas and from California last week. And there's a wide range of approaches with those wines. I love like what they're doing at a Loire Valley with it, including some of the older versions of that wine. That's not a wine that I would have thought about aging, but we had a 2015 from Loire Valley that was just gorgeous.
Really? A 2015?
Yeah. So now we're going to put some in the library and try to see what happens to ours. I think it's a very suited varietal. Ours comes from Kubachak Vineyard, which is a new vineyard on the High Plains, a little bit east of Meadow. So it's kind of in the heart of the Texas grape growing world up there. You know, there's a lot of vineyards around Brownfield and Meadow. There's wineries too there now, and I believe the guys at Kubachak Vineyard will actually open a tasting room on their property out there. It's a newer vineyard. We love that. We love those guys. We love the vineyard owner, and we love the vineyard management that's behind it. So we're really big fans. We're trying to make more. This is definitely not the year where we're going to make more Picpoul than last year, but because grapes are just not there this year. But yeah, we're very happy with it. I think there's bound to be more Picpoul in Texas. I think it's one of those varietals that will do well in the hill country too. there's not a million varietals like that are going to be as good in West Texas as they are in Central Texas. I really think that Picpoul will be one of those two. Yeah, we're very, very happy with it. I just kind of sat out there for 5 days to get the perfect ripeness. Just every day we felt like it was going to be next day, and it's all handpicked, and so we have to have a crew on standby, and they hated my guts. So every day I would defer for one more day, and we're going out there, getting samples, running pH, TA, and just kind of getting the chemistry. Because my first year picking Picpoul, I know what they pick at in France. I just don't know that we can get in the same realm. Like a lot of the time, we're not in the same realm of picking numbers. So and then Picpoul in the vineyard tastes deliciously acidic. Tastes like lemonade, and it's very high in acid. And because it's so high in acid, it's kind of hard to taste what the final wine is going to taste like. So all the other like more floral aromatics, who knows honestly where they come from. We didn't play the fancy winemaking game. We don't tend to play the fancy winemaking game. It might be just that year. It might be that vineyard site. It might just be like a specific expression of that grape. Or it might just be like just the combo of like all those factors plus the technical aspects of that wine. Like when we pick like the more like chemistry driven factors combined with the yeast, the yeast reacts differently at different pH levels, and going to create more esters, going to create more of this, more of that, and just kind of give you a different complexion. But yeah, no, we're if we could replicate what happened last year every single season, I'd be very happy with it.
So that actually brings up another thing I wanted to ask, which is this a 100% varietal Picpoul, or is it blended with anything else?
It's 100% Picpoul.
It is. So
nothing in it. Like I know, like you smell that wine, and you're gonna tell me there's like 5% Viognier in it.
Yes, that's florality.
That's where the aromatics came from. But honestly, Picpoul picks late. So as far as like whites go, we have a site in Florida. It's like 2 hours north of there, and so that's Marsan, and that's my latest pick on whites. But outside of that one site, which is based on like the elevation, I think we picked Marsan earlier than Picpoul if it was on the same side. But otherwise, Picpoul picks pretty late. But Picpoul is a champ at retaining acid. It's really interesting varietal in that factor. It keeps acid for a long time. So we picked it like pretty classically. We wanted to make as close to a classic expression on our first year as we could. And then we tasted, we see what stylistically we could have done differently, and if we want to change something on the vineyard side, and then we kind of adjust. And I really feel like it was a home run on year one. So when we talked about it in the off season, I'm like, let's just make the exact same plan for next year. There's no reason to really change it because we're very, very happy with it. The only thing we wish is that we had a little bit more of it.
Well, I do have to say I love the fact that you talk about things a certain way, because it makes my transitions very easy. The next thing I wanted to actually ask you about was, so I understand that in France, Picpoul is used as a blending grape, and sometimes it's found as a singular varietal. My understanding, and I haven't been to France, so unfortunately I cannot actually say this is all hearsay, but whenever you find Picpoul, it doesn't typically, just as a straight varietal, it doesn't typically tend to be one of the more expensive varietals. It tends to be more like almost like a table wine, like we would find here. So what was it about this batch of Picpoul that you felt elevated it to a level where it should be expressed as a single varietal rather than using and blending?
Well, I wish we had enough to do both, but based on what we got, the early years of that vineyard were pretty rough, like a lot of hailstorms. It just seemed like that vineyard was a magnet for hailstorms. And so last year they made the decision to basically hail net the whole vineyard. And it's a huge expense. It's a really, really big expense. And they hail netted the whole vineyard, and then 2 weeks later we took a huge hailstorm and we had zero damage. It looked like our vines had been edged. Everything that was above the top just got cut. But outside of that, there was honestly not any real damage.
Wow.
It just saved the whole crop, and the Picpoul was perfect. Like there was no there was really like no issue for the rest of the season. It was pretty like slow and steady. Like it seems to be an even keel varietal in terms of how it ripens. It doesn't get disturbed by the heat. In France, they push the yields up on that table wine, like on the table wine side. Well, and what we're calling table wine is probably AOC wine here, and they would be really pissed in France if we say table wine for Picpoul de Pinet or like any AOC wine. But you can push the yields pretty high with Picpoul, at least on the French side when the vines are a bit more established. We could do that too if we ran the irrigation up. This has been a little yielder for us, but it's been making really good wines. There's no reason for us to really change the plant dramatically. Like we're more going to make like small tweaks than anything else. And this year really we're not changing anything altogether. There's just over a period of time you'll learn what the vineyard issues might be. It's Texas. There's going to be a lot of climate variations, and you shouldn't be exactly doing the same thing year to year, just depending on what Mother Nature is going to throw at you on the given year. So far, it's throwing at us like 105-degree days. I have one after another. We had like 12 days in a row. But so far, Picpoul is going through it like a champ, just like last year. We had the highest temperature ever recorded on the high plains last year, and Picpoul was unfazed whatsoever. Like it just, I saw it 48 hours after the end of the heat wave, and it looked like nothing happened to the Picpoul. So that's just seems to be a varietal that's suited. We haven't found yet what there's usually an issue, we just don't know it yet. So maybe we're just jinxing it, and we're going to discover the issue.
Don't say it. Don't even bring it up. Don't even bring it up. It's kind of just stop it right there. You need to know when to press your luck pin.
We'd like to have some as a blender, but we tasted it. We loved it. When we tasted it after fermentation, we keep all our white lots separate. Some of it goes in barrels for French Connection. Some of it goes into tanks. And Picpoul, like our choice for Picpoul is just all tank fermented, like just highlight that like clean crispness of it. And we just decided about all of it just the way it was, just based on how much we had. We wanted to have a little bit more, but that's what the vineyard gave us. And so we had to choose if we're going to use it as a blender. And it was such a beautiful wine by itself. It's great. There's no way we're going to sacrifice all of it into a blend. So.
Yeah. So my wife has had a Picpoul once before, and she was just kind of like, oh, I can't drink this. I think it's going to give me heartburn. And on yours, she was like, it's really high in acid, but I don't feel like it's killing me. And I really do feel like it had to do more with the fact that it wasn't like this straight like green apple and lemon effect. Like there were other things that were happening in this wine. It almost felt like it was a little bit more creamy than some of the other Picpouls that I've had in the past. And I think that was kind of what allowed her to kind of go through and essentially she stole the bottle from me after I let her have a glass. And this is why I've gone through a couple bottles of your Picpoul at this point.
We spent some time on the lees, not a huge amount of time, but we did spend some time on the primary lees. So that might have a little bit of a factor to it. And then we're not high in alcohol, but you're going to get a little bit more creaminess. Like we're 12% alcohol. So by Calais standard, this would be called a very low alcohol wine. But by Picpoul standard, or like European Picpoul, French Picpoul, it's kind of in line. We basically try to get like a certain ratio of like acid to sugar, and we got lucky that we got it right on the money. We waited every single day, pushing back the picking date a day or two, just keeping a crew on standby. I'm sure they hate me, but we handpicked it. It handpicks pretty well, so we're going to keep handpicking it, which also means that we have very low phenolics in it. So it was pressed with whole clusters, so that helps you just press more gently and still get juice out of it. And so it's a very it's more labor intensive. It's more expensive overall. You reduce your yields, but we really like the wine that came out of it. So that's there's some varietals where it doesn't matter. We make Sauvignon Blanc, we make Roussanne. It doesn't have to be done that way for those varietals. Those varietals can sustain phenolicness to some level. Some people actually look for it. Like if you want to make a really edgeworthy Sauvignon Blanc in Bordeaux, you're probably going to try to get a little bit of phenolicness. So you'll press it a little harder, you'll destem it, put it to soak for a couple hours or 4 hours before you put it in the press. Like there's different ways to achieve that. But to me, Picpoul, it's a different use. Like there's a different outcome that you'd like to have out of the varietal, and the varietal is really screaming for us to just keep the winemaking on the simpler side. So we didn't really do anything fancy to it. Just let the vineyard show you what it wants to do.
So
the varietal it's definitely a varietal characteristic there too.
Yeah. So what would you pair with this? If you're gonna have this wine with some food, it doesn't have to be one of your 2-person feast that you make, but if you were gonna just in general recommend this wine to somebody, what would you pair it with?
I think like first and foremost, this is like a Texas summer wine. Like this is for drinking by itself or like as an aperitif wine. It's hot. It's 4 p.m. It's hot. If you happen to be outside, you shouldn't. But if you happen to be outside and you don't want to drink beer, this is definitely like the closest, most drinkable thing that you're gonna have. So that'd be my first go-to. My home region is known for mussels. This is definitely a great mussel wine. You can both use it as your steaming liquid and drink. There's nothing better than drinking along with the wine they use for cooking. And there's not that much wine needs to get sacrificed to steam some mussels. So oysters, like any shellfish is going to be great. A lot of fish is going to be great. I don't know why I would go outside of like the fish world, but I really think it's just like it works beautifully, like poolside outdoors, like as that first bottle before you actually get into food pairings. I think that's the spot for that wine. The way we make it makes it even more of that style of wine. It's kind of what Picpoul de Pinet is for in France too. So.
Yeah, I love it. I think it's a fantastic wine, and as you see, it's making its way out of this bottle as we speak. But I do have another one, which is your 2019 La Connection Rosé. So I'd like to talk about that one for a few minutes, if you don't mind.
Okay. I got one too.
Yay! Well, I hope you would. You kind of made them.
A lot of the time I don't have them at home. And, I was just very happy when I looked in the wine fridge and I actually had one of those guys.
So this is from the High Plains as well, right?
Yes, all of it. It's mostly Mourvèdre. There's a little bit of Grenache, and there's an insignificant amount of Cinsault in there. But it exists. I think it's 0.4% of Cinsault, so really it's not there, but it's there on paper.
So the 2018 was totally Mourvèdre, right? If I recall.
Yes. Well, in 18, I had to make those wines at Calais, and we didn't have much space at Calais, so we had to pick and choose which varietals to make. We didn't have tanks. We had a few tanks. So in 18, it was all Mourvèdre. This is still 85% Mourvèdre. So if we wanted to write Mourvèdre Rosé on there, we could. So the rest basically is Grenache. Those are two varietals that make the two of the run varietals that make fantastic rosé. To me, like there's nothing like rosé from run varietals. We make two main rosés. One that's Vin Gris, which is Cinsault based. With a little bit of other stuff blended in it. And then this guy, that's the opposite side of the spectrum where we want a little bit more body to it. So it's more inspired by Bandol versus the Vin Gris is more like Provence style. So we have kind of like opposite side of the spectrum. So I always tell people this is more your meal rosé. Like this is definitely like,
yeah, this is hearty.
Already had your bottle of Picpoul, and now you're grilling, you're eating meats, you're eating sausages, you're eating like grilled chicken, marinated grilled chicken, like anything you can put on the grill. This is your summer meal rosé. This is not your before the meal, this is your during the meal wine. And because of that, we wanted to stand its own against like a little bit stronger food. So we want to touch a tannin. So we have a little bit more tannin in there. We don't want it to be like overwhelming. We don't want to make that wine like a red wine. We're still doing mostly direct pressing here. But we're we're definitely trying to like kind of tune in a little bit of tannin, a little bit of natural tannin. We're not adding anything. We're just trying to tune it in at the press time, a little skin contact, a little bit of press, like a slower press cycle. Maybe we'll like leave the skins and juice in the press for an hour or two before we start the press cycle to just get a little bit more body, like a little bit more hump on it.
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit more grippy than the Vin Gris that I've had in the past. That was very much more your kind of, I want to kind of snack outside. I want some wine to go with it type of like that's the Greek charcuterie board one, right? So like I've actually had this one in the past. I cooked a ribeye with it, doing the whole reverse sear method, and that was like I had the rosé, and I was like, well, I have this Tannat, but the Tannat's like it probably needs to age like another 5 years before it's even worth it. And then I was like, well, I have this, and I tasted it with it. It's like, oh God, this is good. It's almost a religious experience. It's so good. I just loved this wine. And then when I found out it wasn't it did taste a little bit different than your 2018. And that's whenever I went in and Sherry had mentioned that it was actually blended with some Grenache. And that kind of leads me around to my next question, which is, why did you end up changing the blend from 2018 to 2019? Because 2018 was really friggin' good. I think this is also fantastic. So I'm just wondering, what was your decision whenever you're going through the winemaking process of wanting to add a different varietal in?
Well, now we have a building and we have tanks. We can do it. We can do it the way we wanted to do it. In 18, we had to make all those wines at Calais. And so if we wanted to make Vin Gris, and we want to make the Connection Rosé, that means we had to choose one varietal for each of the two tanks. And so we made the Vin Gris in one tank, and we made a Connection Rosé in the second tank. And that was the beginning and the end of that. So it was very practical concerns. And over time, as we're fine tuning all this, it's always the beauty of the Rhone Valley. You can fine tune with blending. Like there's people in Texas that will buy like bulk wine, California juice, just whatever to fine tune the wines. We're huge believers that we can do all this from 100% Texas grapes. If we create more colors to paint, including on the rosé side, we're going to make rosés with more complexity. And if I tell you this is 100% Mourvèdre, I would find it hard for you to tell me that it is not 100% Mourvèdre. But the little bit of Grenache that we have in there, we're not going to talk about the Sanso because it was not really significant.
I didn't even know it was in there until you mentioned it.
I can't remember how we ended up with like a 0.5% worse of Sanso. We might have had like maybe like 3 gallons too much when we were doing something and we decided to put it in there. But really like the Grenache, we make it with a little bit more tannin so that we can actually like bring a little grapier tannin to the wine, and then we can just make all those wines separate. And then 3-4 months down the road, when the wines are a little bit more defined, we get to really fine tune things. Like this, it's a weird way. It's kind of the Bordeaux way in Provence and the Rhone Valley. They want to assemble those wines as fast as possible. We tend to keep all our colors as defined and as separate as possible until last minute. And so it took us a long time to actually get those rosés in the bottle this year, because we had, for the first time, quite a few decisions that we could make. Like, do we put the Grenache in there? Do we not put the Grenache in there? Do we put it under our label? Do we actually like send it out somewhere else? Do we like, how do we like create, like, we want French Connection to make wines that are kind of consistent. That doesn't mean we want to remove vintage effect, but that means that we want to use our blending ability as a way to create like consistently good wines that have a definitive style to them. So the varietal wines told a different story. There's no playroom there. So whatever you got out of the vineyard, we use some vineyard Syrah, and it's all over the map stylistically. It's always delicious, but one year's like Northern Rhone Syrah, and next year's like full on like Australian style. And it's rarely in between. It's usually to the extremes. And it's really interesting wine, but it doesn't have any kind of consistency to it. Yeah. It's awesome. It's very fun as a winemaker, but it's not very easy to explain to people. Like when you switch vintage, you want to put a big fat warning saying, hey, by the way, it's not because you like the previous vintage that you're going to like this one. Where with a wine like that, once we have the blending ability, it creates a little bit more of an ability to fine tune those programs. So without any fancy technology, without any like real intervention on the winemaking side, we have the ability to create, like, maybe one year we have like really fantastic Grenache. We want to take all our Grenache into red. We can still saignée a little bit. So we'll have like a little bit of saignée. This was not saignée, this was direct press on purpose, just to make rosé, just to give us one more color to paint with. So there's just a lot of different options in front of us, and that's what allows us to do the building that we have at French Connection, where we don't have very large tanks. We have a lot of smaller tanks, so we have the ability to really keep all those lots separate until it's time to really make the decision of like how we're going to paint the best we can paint. And so we tend to keep a lot of lots. The computer system is telling us we're crazy for the size winery we're running to have so many lots. It's 6 pages worth of lots on our software.
Oh, wow.
But there's a time where you're happy you have all those colors. And I wish we had a little bit more Picpoul, and we could have kept some to like blend in some of the other wines, the other whites. So there's always a big upside to having all those lots separate until you're ready to. And this is my approach. There's going to be plenty of people in the wine world that disagree. There's people who will like literally take all their stuff off of the vineyard on the exact same day and blend it like as a field blend to make their rosés. And I'm not saying it's a bad way. I'm just saying it's not my way. Mm-hmm. We like to have options on the table once the time comes to build something, because are you looking for something that's going to have a little bit more consistency? Are you trying to develop a style that you know people are going to love year after year after year? Or are you trying to make wines that are going to be totally random year to year? And there's no right or wrong here. I have friends that are making like full natural wines where you honestly don't know. You have 3 bottles of the exact same wine, but on the same day, you don't know which wine's going to show up on the bottle side, because they're not looking for any kind of consistency on the wine side. We're trying to achieve that. We want you to bring home the exact same wine that you tasted in the tasting room. Like, we want you to have that same experience over and over and over, and just be as consistent as possible on those specific wines. Now, the varietal wine is a totally different ballgame, but
yeah. Well, I mean, it's the whole argument between vintage and cuvee, right? Like, are you going for a house style, or are you going for actually allowing for some expression of what's going on in the vineyard that year? And there are a lot of people who go down that path of saying, I want to make cuvee wines because I want to make something that is. It's going to sound horrible, but it's not a bad thing. I want to make something that's commercially reliable every year for the people who have become interested in my winemaking style. So that way they know from 2020, it's going to be the same as 2021 and on all the way down. Whereas there are other winemakers who are willing to allow for the whole vintage to kind of express what's going on with the climate and the terroir and everything going on.
The vintage is still going to express stuff. I don't like the term commercially viable. We try to make stuff that's commercially viable, but it's definitely not the first concern in this case. I just think that it's interesting to go all the way into the corner on some wines, but not every one that you make should be that way. Like, it depends how nerdy how small and nerdy you want your winery to be. And Calais is very, very small and very, very nerdy. And we're willing to go all the way into the corner with those wines. But here there's also like stylistic approaches to those wines, which we can create. And we created with no fancy technology. Like, when we say commercially viable wine, usually we mean wines that have like very heavy intervention on them. Here we're talking about wines that have very minimal intervention to them. So there's no fancy technology. There's not really much happening to those wines. We're creating them separate, which is the oldest technique in the book. We're creating them separate so that we can blend them later on. So that to me, that's not the same as like most of what we would call commercially viable wines, which are very large productions. Like, if you take all our production at French Connection, we don't qualify as a winery in the US. We're like top, we're like maybe like top 1% of the bottom 2%. We might be in the 2% or 3% tile of size. Like this is a tiny batch, but we sell everything from our own place basically. Yeah, so there's every winery has like different approach, but our line of like signature wines, the Connection wines, we want to make sure that we're expressing vintage. We're not trying to remove vintage effect, but we want to use the fact that traditionally in the Rhone valleys, those wines are blended as a tool for us to not go all the way to the corner every single year just because that's what the season. It gives us like ability to create a little bit of a consistency, even though it's not like, we're not trying to remove vintage effect. We're not playing with like fancy winemaking techniques. We don't have like, there's no tannins, there's no like, there's no heavy-handed winemaking practices used any of that stuff. So we're not trying to create real like full-on like similarities between the vintages. Like I'm sure the alcohol, don't remember what the alcohol was last year, but 19 was definitely a lower alcohol year. So specifically on Mourvèdre, we had trouble getting Mourvèdre to ripen. Reading 12.8 on this guy. Yeah. I would venture that the 2018 would be higher. I don't remember exactly what the 18 was, but we want Mourvèdre to be a little bit riper, and we want Grenache to be a little bit riper by the time we make it into rosé. It makes more interesting rosés for us. And the tannins, if you're going to extract a little bit of tannin, you kind of want those tannins to not be green and harsh.
Oh no, you don't want to make a Carmenere by accident. That's what you. that's never fun. So one of the things I talked about with the Picpoul is pairing it with food, but for the rosé, I actually want to take a different spin with it, and instead of saying which food would you pair this with, I want to say like what type of like event or gathering or like sort of like social situation would you say like, hey, this is the best like place for my rosé to really shine?
Everything this is everything you can put on grill wine. It can be beef, it can be pork, it can be chicken. I just think that it's a gathering by the grill. Like it's gonna shine with a lot of like summer grilling items. In Texas, we have this luxury of grilling in the summer and in the winter.
All year round. Yeah. It's warm all the time.
yeah, it's like a few days of like cold and then a couple of days of snow and then everything else pretty much warm. I think summer is like the tough season here, but winter is a pretty beautiful season down here. It's never that cold for that long. But yeah, like I think it's like that by the grill kind of wine, and you can roll it depending on how many people you got. You can roll it into with the meal, or you can just finish the bottle as you're kind of snacking off the grill, which is customary if you're grilling.
It's fine. You have to have something to drink. If you're going to put forth the sweat equity in order to actually make the food, you get to kind of partake a little earlier.
Yeah, you get to grab those little choice bits, and you're just making sure that's grilled right.
Exactly. You don't want to serve people bad food. Correct. And you have to be able to wash it down with something while you're out there. So I mean, this is just 100%. This is very Texas logic here. I mean, it's just the way it needs to be.
And I think it's a great pairing with beef. I'd go leaner beef, like maybe not like going like the prime ribeye route. If you're drinking it outside, it might show tannins a little bit more than you'd like. But I think even like beef fajitas, things like that, that's gonna work great too. There's enough tannin in there to sustain some fat in the beef. Maybe not like going all the way to like super fatty, maybe not like Wagyu beef, but there's definitely like space for quite a bit of range on the beef side.
So the last time that I had this, I did a ribeye. The time before that, in which I had this wine, I actually had an Axis burger, and I think Axis pairs exceptionally well with this wine. So I don't know if you're a hunter or if you know people who hunt, but that is something that tastes better than beef. It's leaner, and on top of that, your wine was pretty much made for it. I don't even know if you know that or not.
Yeah, we have a lot of wildlife around us.
Chasing it down.
I'll leave it at that. I have dogs that love chasing down. So.
That's awesome.
so much that they're not really allowed on the winery property because we don't know where they're going to end up. We know they're not going to end up on our property. They're gonna go and chase some kind of animal 3 properties down, and our neighbors are really cool, but nonetheless, you know, we don't need them chasing cows and deer. And we do have access on the property at French Connection. I have videos to prove it.
Well, the thing you have to worry about especially with dogs chasing stuff in the hill country is you have to worry about porcupines. That's the biggest worry is they'll stumble upon a porcupine, not realize what it is, and then very expensive vet bill later, you're dealing with a dog that also has ongoing care for a couple months while it heals. And I'm a dog person, but I also know that dogs don't remember that a porcupine hurt them. So if they ever see it again, it just happens again. It's just a repeatable cycle of just dogs getting
Yeah,
quilled.
there's a lot of Great Pyrenees here that are staying with sheep mostly. And those guys, those guys will get it every single time.
Mhm.
If they have like 2 Great Pyrenees, both of them are going to end up at the vet. And then 2 weeks later, the exact same guy will still be there, and they'll do it exactly again on the exact same
Yep.
dude. They don't quite realize, but they're bred to take care of their herd, and
Yeah.
can't be
They're,
mad at them for
they're
doing what
doing
they
their job.
do.
They're just not the brightest of animals.
Well, they can't
Unfortunately.
resist it,
Yeah,
We all have things we can't resist.
yeah. So the last question that I have for you tonight is so with Calais, you've kind of gone the Bordeaux route. With French Connection, you've gone the Rhone route. Do you have any other projects in mind in which you're going to try to do something like Loire Valley or Chablis or Alsace or anything like that that's in the works where you're kind of like I'd only have 2 wineries, but yet I still want more. Like, is there anything out there that you have in mind at this
There's a moratorium on projects. There's too many projects in Ben's life. So, like, there's a cutoff. There will not be a Calais restaurant. There will not be a Calais bakery, or Victoria is the baker, really. I bake
moment?
bread,
Yeah,
and she bakes everything else. And everybody's like, "Oh, are you guys gonna open a bakery?" And like, nope, no bakery in our future. Um, I have I have sometimes a hard time to resist when I'm presented with some like really cool vineyard sites, that things that are historical, or like maybe those more like one-off. Like, I think we're done with like theme things. Like, there's not a I love the Loire Valley. I personally love the white side of the Loire Valley
hmm
more. Like, I really love Chenin Blanc. I love Sauvignon Blanc. The Sauvignon Blanc expression we get in Texas, which we make for Calais, is way more Bordeaux style than it
yes.
is.
Anything
It's
else?
not
Like,
good.
there's
Yeah.
no California, there's no New Zealand. The first thing I thought whenever I tried a straight Texas Sauvignon Blanc varietal was I was like, wow, this tastes like France. It doesn't taste like anywhere else. It just full on tastes like France.
So I'm not saying there's not going to be like a couple one-off wines that are going to come out one day, just because I couldn't resist putting my fingers in a specific vineyard side that's like cool and nerdy stuff. But I don't think there's going to be like new a new winery is going to pop out somewhere that's going to be all like Loire Valley. I'm not as huge a fan of the reds from the Loire Valley, and I know like a lot of wine nerds will like be mad at me for saying that. It's just not my thing. Like, it's not wines that, and I seem to have bad luck. We opened one yesterday and it was like so corked it was not even drinkable. And I can't remember who gave us those bottles. We rarely ever buy those bottles, so we usually all our Loire Valley red intake is from gifts. And thank you to whoever gave me that bottle. The cork crumbled when I pulled it out. I'm like, well, that's a bad sign. And then I poured a just a little sample, and I just smell it. And I'm like, well, okay. That was a bottle of Saumur. And so there's not another one of those that's like, I would say, necessary. I think 2 wineries are already excessive. 3 would be definitely like way excessive, and we're on the road to that. Was the Fort Davis project. And so I don't have like something that I'm really working on, but doesn't mean there's not going to be a one-off wine or something that we hide in one of the wineries that's technically not 100% from that region, but that we might release something under side label one day, or it's hard. Like one time it was presented the day after it got ripped up with some of the oldest vines. So technically Chenin Blanc was one of the biggest varietals in the US, and like a long time ago, like before Chardonnay and all that. And there was some really old plantings of Chenin Blanc in Texas. I love Chenin Blanc. I think it's a really great varietal. Yes. I think it makes beautiful wines in Texas. I think it's totally underutilized. And then I was at the vineyard site, and they had a field right next door that was totally plowed, and it was not theirs. It was their neighbor. And they're like, yeah, well, those were like 45-year-old vines of Chenin Blanc, and nobody wanted them. Like nobody wanted to pay what it cost to keep older vines that don't produce as much. So like, if we're presented with that scenario, it's kind of hard to just say, oh, we're not going to be on the side of preserving that. It's a little bit like the fight that's happening in Lodi right now with some of those older vineyards. They don't produce as much. You can't always sell Lodi wine for a very high price point because there's an expectation on the market side of what people should pay. And sad. It's sometimes hard to explain that this wine should be 3 times the money because 1/3 the yield of the neighbor. And so when presented that case scenario, it might be hard for me to say no and not be on the side of preserving one of those really cool historical sites. So the first time I didn't have a choice, they had brought in a dozer the day prior and leveled the whole vineyard. So there was a pile of vine on the side of the vineyard and trolley systems and things like that that had been already removed. So it was too late. But you know, if it was to be that scenario, I'm not saying that I wouldn't take the 3 tons of Chenin Blanc and make a little side label one day, but we don't have another like real project. It's I think it's enough. I think we have enough projects.
So what you're doing is breaking my heart because I really want you to do like find a way to really make an all sauce like Texas Riesling or Gewürztraminer or like there's something there like use a noble grape, but oh, you're breaking my heart here. You're breaking my heart.
I think it's going to be a really cool project for somebody else to tackle.
You know what?
I can't be the only one with excessive amounts of projects. I have to lift some for other people.
That's true. That's true.
There's a lot of cool stuff coming up in Texas. I think there's a lot more interesting things that are popping out. I think a lot of winemakers in Texas, they start not really having like a definitive stylistic guideline, like a very defined, here's what we're going to do, how we're going to go at it. Is it going to be hill country? Is it going to be high plains? So a lot of people, they kind of start with like full-on shotgun of doing a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of Italian, French, Spanish, Portuguese varietals. And I'm not saying it's a bad plan. You know, you cover ground. If you're a retail winery, covering ground might actually help you. But I always refer people to the fact that a lot of the wineries that we all revere in the wine business, they're wineries that don't do 20 different things. They're wineries that are really honed in on being as good as possible. And like, I just think that for me to make Riesling is just totally out of left field and kind of distracting me from my existing pursuits. And I can't just be chasing everything and expect to be really good at a million different things. So we have too many vineyard sites. We cover too much ground. We have too many wineries. Like I can't complicate the scenario anymore.
Well, I can't wait for the day where Elon Musk can clone you and we can actually go through with the whole Texas Alsatian Riesling thing. So
isn't there a place? Isn't it Castroville?
Yeah,
that's a little Alsatian community down there. Somebody, if you really want to make that a plan, you know, somebody's got to buy a building in Castroville and make like High Plains Riesling in Castroville, Texas, 6 different ways or 6 different vineyard sites or something like that. But
hey,
some
of the oldest grape growing sites in Texas are around the Rio Grande Valley, just going all the way up into like El Paso and stuff like that. So I mean, it's not out of the question. It's not out of the question, but
I'm not saying it's a bad plan. I'm just saying it needs to be somebody else's plan.
Okay, I get that. Anyway, thank you for joining me today, Ben, and letting everybody kind of know a little bit about you, a little about these great wines that you that you've released. So just in case anyone doesn't know how to get your wine, can you kind of talk for a second just about where they can go in order to get your wines and what they should be knowing about you going forward?
Calais is 100% direct to consumer. So we sell from the winery door. and the winery door only. We are currently, doing to-go sales. We're shipping. Just like everybody, we're trying to find a way to just kind of survive whatever this period will be called in the history book. It's it's definitely a time where we feel like direct to consumer, we're having a harder time just kind of getting our wine out there and connecting with our customers. But the winery is open Friday, Saturday, Sunday for to go and pick up all that stuff. We started doing 100 milliliter packs, like 5 mini bottles that people can actually take tastings to go. It is not a tasting. It is done in such, we repackage the wine in 100 milliliter bottles, which is the legal way. So we're trying to find new avenues for people to actually like go home or go to their B&B and go and taste those wines and still kind of get the tasting experience. And then at French Connection, it's a little bit the same, although we do have a few spots. We have a little bit more production out there. So we have a few spots that are actually selling our wines. I will not try to list them because I honestly don't know all of them and I'm going to piss somebody off. But I want to say we have like between 8 and 10 different places, from like wine bars. It's all hill country. We're doing it ourselves. So it's places in Fredericksburg and Bernie and Kerrville and things like that. Usually wine bars, people that can talk. Nobody knows us. So it's better if people can talk about our wines before they try to sell a bottle. So we don't have like retail, off the shelf retail. You can pick up a bottle like La Bergerie in Fredericksburg, which I guess is a hybrid between a wine bar and a retail. So there's a wine club in the works for French Connection. I don't know when you're going to put this out, but there might be a wine club by the time you put this one out. Yeah, so there's a lot more coming out on the French Connection side. We have some cool new things happening next few years out there. Some varietals nobody's ever heard of, and some really strange, cool things. We're about to release Counoise from Farmhouse Vineyard. We're doing some of the weirder stuff from the Rhone Valley, which is really interesting winemaking.
You can't drop that as the outro. I mean, that just like, oh man. Okay, so whenever you start releasing the other stuff, I'm gonna have to come back, because like that's just, you're such a tease. It's not even fair.
I mean, I really think like people are gonna want to be in the wine club at French Connection because we have a lot of really fun stuff. I just dropped one, but we have a lot of really fun stuff coming up. We've done some really cool stuff last year, we have in the next 12 months we have a lot of really interesting stuff that's gonna come out. Things that are like definitely on the more nerdy, unknown side, and we're not the only one making Counoise in Texas, but I think it's another varietal that's going to shine. Is as happy in the vineyard as I've seen. And like a dry year like last year, and a hot year, and like in the frost episodes, and the spring frost and the fall frost, like it's just another one of those that I don't know if it'll be like a home run, kind of like Picpoul was, but I think it's a cool, and like if you want a summer red to be drinking outside, slightly chilled, I think Counoise, like Sanso and Counoise, to me in the Rhone varietal lineup, those are the two that kind of fulfill that. With Counoise being a little bit fresher, and Sanso actually having a little bit more tannin to it. It's not a lot, but there's definitely a little bit more tannin to it.
Yeah.
Those are things that people don't expect me to be making, just based on like all the stuff that we do at Calais, and we do a lot of like kind of steak wine, as people like to call them. Wine is very high tannin, very dark, very concentrating, high alcohol. But at French Connection, Counoise should taste like Counoise, and so we're gonna let those wines kind of make themselves and just kind of decide what the Counoise expression. And there's no binary, there's no expected style to Counoise. Nobody's ever tried Counoise before. It's a minor blender, so you can just let it decide what it wants to do, and maybe we're discovering what the expression of Counoise is going to be. So it's really awesome. A big thanks to Katie Jane for letting me steal a couple tons last year and play with it, and now we're really excited because it looks awesome this year. There's a lot of our vineyard sites that are a little bit beat up by that big heat wave that lasted forever, but Counoise is very happy. Very happy.
That's awesome. Well, thank you for your time today, Ben. And yeah, if anyone wants to know how to get in touch with Calais Winery or French Connection, just look at the video description below, and I'll put a link to their website. And hopefully, if you've for some reason you can't get it shipped to you, then at least you can stop by and visit when you go to the Texas Hill Country, because the Texas Hill Country, especially the Wine Road 290, is a pretty fantastic place. So I do recommend that you go.
Yeah, just one little thing is remember that Calais Winery is by appointment. During
That's
COVID,
true.
we're not, but under normal circumstances, we tend to book like a month in advance. We don't want anybody to show up at the winery on a Saturday and they're pissed at me because we have no way to squeeze them in, which is usually the case on Saturday. So French Connection, if we don't have space for doing tasting, it kind of depends on how much space we have on a given hour. But if there's always, like on the patio, there's always a spot you can grab a bottle, charcuterie board. So if you don't really have like a set plan for the day, go to French Connection first. And if you really want to make it to Calais, just remember to make an appointment.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, because in general, you're never there at Calais anyway. You're too busy doing other stuff. And then at French Connection, if anyone wants to complain, they can just see me, because there's a good chance that on a weekend I'm there anyway. So let's just be honest. I mean, that's probably what's going to happen. Just come complain to me. I will take it up with whoever I need to take it up with, and we'll take it from there. So anyway, thank you for your time tonight, Ben.
All right. That was great.
Anyway, this has been Stuart with Wine on the Dime. If you liked today's video, please like, subscribe, and comment. Have you been out to the Texas Hill Country? Have you visited the French Connection or Calais Wines? And if not, what's holding you back besides the whole quarantine and COVID and all that other stuff? But I mean, as soon as all that blows over, just go out, have some fun. You might see me there, or you might see me again on another episode of Wine on the Dime.